Yes. Yes it is. There are two main reasons why I think that this grenade launcher is totally busted, and they are both related to the weapon's ability to consistently deal damage at mid to long ranges. Firstly, the Loch-n-Load's increased range allows for the Demoman to spam grenades from across the map almost completely risk-free. Remember that unlike most weapons in the game, grenades do not suffer from damage falloff, so each direct will deal 100 damage. Secondly, Loch-n-Load grenades are significantly harder to react to and dodge at mid-range. Now, naysayers might be rushing to the comments to tell me that this is all balanced because of the item's downsides, but to be honest, I find the downsides underwhelming considering the huge upsides. I will come back to the drawbacks of the Loch later in this video. For now, I want to focus on the most important feature of the weapon, the increased projectile speed. This faster travel speed is the reason why the Loch-n-Load is such a menace at long ranges. But before I can explain why the 25% projectile speed buff is so overpowered, I need to cover some grenade launcher basics. The way that you aim a grenade in TF2 changes depending on the distance between you and the target. If you are very close, you don't need to account for the arc of the projectile or the time the pill takes to travel from the barrel of your launcher to its destination. At these extremely close ranges, the launchers are essentially hit scanned because the target is unable to react to the projectile and move out of the way. Just a brief editor's note, if you look at these clips of hitting directs at point blank, it may not look like the grenades are aimed like hit scan, but that is because the projectile comes out of the right side of your screen. So at point blank, a perfect shot would actually be slightly to the left of the target, but once you get the hang of it, it is essentially hit scan. Now, at mid-range, you need to account for the arc of the grenade. If you are aiming too low, you may hit the floor instead of directly hitting your target. You also need to account for their movement, since by the time the projectile travels from you to where you were aiming, the target probably moved somewhere else. In the mid-range, it is possible to react to a grenade and move out of the way, but depending on the movement speed of the target, it may be impossible. A spun up heavy can't move as fast as a scout, so depending on what you are shooting at, a perfectly aimed grenade might still be guaranteed damage at a shorter mid-range. Lastly, at long ranges, the demo will have to aim significantly higher than the target due to the arc of the projectile being more pronounced at this distance. Furthermore, the demo will have to lead the shot by quite a bit, assuming the target is traveling in a straight line, since the speed of the grenade is a larger factor at this range. Because of the increased travel time of the pill, the target also has more time to react to the incoming 100 damage and move out of the way. This is why grenades dealing 100 damage at any range is theoretically balanced, because assuming perfect play, the grenades will never directly hit the target because the target can just move. Now in practice, this doesn't always happen. Sometimes you are distracted by other things, or you simply failed to react in time and still eat the grenade. Other times, you just get really unlucky and turn a corner into a direct. 100 damage at long range is a really big deal in TF2 because most classes are only able to deal lots of damage up close. Even just one direct pipe from across the map can tip the scales of a teamfight in a close game. In fact, in competitive matches where teams actually communicate, hitting a medic for 100 damage from across the map can and will be capitalized on.
They're up valley.
Keep going on cyber.
Let's pipe behind rock right now. Let's pipe collapse.
Cyber
collapse.
down.
Okay. No sniper, no sniper.
Through connectors.
Sandwich my rock, Kiku.
But why is this relevant to the Loch-n-Load, you may ask? Well, keep in mind that these three different ranges, close range, mid-range, and long range, are more of a concept than an actual value because, like I said, it depends on the movement speed of the target, as well as other factors such as ping. But here's a rough approximation of what these zones look like for the grenade launcher and the iron bomber. Remember that in this zone, the grenade is effectively unavoidable. The Loch-n-Load zones look more like this, which is all due to the very speedy projectile. On the topic of speed, this video is sponsored by Merchant.tf, the fastest way to buy, trade, and even cash out your TF2 items, all at prices that are cheaper than the Steam community market and other competitors. Using Merchant.tf is fast, safe, and easy, only taking a few clicks, which is a lot faster than other sites or old-fashioned trading. On top of all that, Merchant.tf hosts weekly giveaways. By using my code BROCCOLI, you can get up to $5 back on your first order. The link will be in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks again to Merchant.tf for sponsoring the video. Now, if the sniper class is any indication, dealing big damage at big distances is a big deal, and the Loch-n-Load enables Demo to do just that. This thing encourages you to lob long-range spam that would normally be unlikely to hit, and therefore be a waste of ammo with stock or Iron Bomber, and instead you get rewarded with frankly undeserved damage. And yes, as a demo main, it is honestly pretty undeserved when you hit somebody from across the map with the Loch-n-Load. Even at mid-range, the Loch-n-Load projectiles are simply too fast to react most of the time, and at long range, dodging the spam is similarly difficult as dodging mid-range stock pipes. Most players are simply not focused on dodging spam at these ranges because they would normally have much more time to react. This is why playing against a really good lock demo feels so awful, because you just end up eating 100 damage way more often unless you are paying super close attention. Just to give an example, here is a clip of me attempting to react to stock grenades being fired at me. As you can see from this distance, I am able to move out of the way by simply seeing the grenades coming and moving out of the way. At the same distance, I am unable to react in time to the Loch-n-Load shots. Due to lock pills being very difficult to reactively dodge, a good lock demo forces the enemy to proactively avoid projectiles by staying out of spam lanes, being forced to avoid interacting with the class at long range. For some reason, I'm getting the weirdest sense of deja vu. But anyways, if your medic is forced to play more passive to avoid the absurd spam capabilities of the lock, then your team will also have to play more passively, sacrificing vision and space. Now, the Loch-n-Load doesn't always have to be used to spam from across the map. It is still very useful in close range encounters as well, but it gives the demo player an option to go for very safe spam from distances that are normally impossible to be effective from with other launchers. This is a big deal, because at long ranges, the Demoman has a similar reward for hitting spam pipes due to the lack of damage falloff, minus the risk of being close to the other team. Now, some of you watching may still not be convinced that the projectile speed upside is enough to justify the downsides of the item. Losing some splash damage and one grenade in the magazine surely isn't worth it, right? Well, North American competitive players thought that it was, since the Loch-n-Load was becoming increasingly meta in both Sixes and Highlander before it got banned in both formats a few years back. The item has been banned for years in other regions. I think it is important to mention that there was a lot of dialogue regarding this weapon leading up to the North American bans, and that there were arguments in favor of keeping it unbanned that came from high-level players. However, the majority of the scene did not like playing with and against the Loch-n-Load, largely due to the passive spam from across the map playstyle it promoted. I personally thought that the Iron Bomber was better, but the more experience I got playing with and against the faster grenades, I came to realize how obnoxious the item is, and I now think it is a lot stronger than the Iron Bomber. This simply boils down to direct grenades being far easier to hit consistently with the lock in my experience. I promised I would talk about the item's downsides, which I will admit are actually a pretty big deal. At least losing out on rollers and an extra shot is. Before I get to those, I gotta just point out that I barely noticed the reduced area of effect stat line. Now, don't get me wrong, AoE is honestly pretty OP, and I have gotten a number of egregious multi-kills running both stock and Iron Bomber. However, the Loch-n-Load's splash radius is still ample powerful, and honestly, I think it might need a nerf. Like, the area of effect is still extremely noticeable despite being 25% smaller. Maybe this is because I am used to the Iron Bomber, which also has a reduced splash radius. To me, it seems like the area of effect is still quite generous, unlike the direct hit. In my eyes, the main drawback here is that the AoE will deal slightly less damage than stock or Iron Bomber, but you are going to get all that damage on top of 100 damage direct that's easier to hit, so this isn't really that big of a deal. Now, having no rollers definitely sucks. Both stock and IB rollers can actually be pretty impactful, but at the end of the day, directs are king. 100 damage once is still more than 3 30 damage Iron Bomber rollers. Most of the time, a roller ends up being a consolation prize for missing a direct, so if you were getting value out of the projectile speed stat, which is pretty easy to do, then the lack of rollers is less noticeable. Now, in my opinion, the biggest downside of the lock is the reduced mag size, going from 4 shots to 3. I definitely feel this in my games sometimes. I will have a shot lined up, but when I click, I don't have any ammo left. Again, I use the Iron Bomber a lot, so my ammo management muscle memory sometimes gets confused when I'm rocking the Loch-n-Load. On the topic of ammo management, I have been ignoring the elephant in the room, and now it's time to point it out. The grenade launchers do not exist in a vacuum. Demoman has a secondary weapon, secondary in air quotes because I am talking about the sticky bomb launcher. Of course, if you are running a shield or the sticky jumper, this smaller clip downside can be pretty debilitating. However, most of the time, I run sticky bombs. Having an 8 projectile magazine kind of reduces the need for a 4th pill because you have an incredible amount of stopping power available without having to reload. In fact, since the sticky bomb launcher is so overpowered, I use it as a primary weapon most of the time. If I need some on-demand short-range damage, or if I have a long-range spam opportunity, then I can switch to my pipes. And the Loch-n-Load excels at both of these things, as I have already pointed out. One thing I seemingly always forget to mention as I'm writing about this weapon is that it deals 20% extra damage to buildings. This stat is actually incredibly strong since it allows pipes to kill a level 3 sentry in only 2 shots instead of 3. Ironically, I find this to be totally overshadowed by the projectile speed, but it is certainly a nice cherry on top. Another minor upside to this weapon is that the arc of the grenades are less pronounced than stock because they travel faster, meaning that you are able to thread a grenade through a small gap where fitting a stock pipe would be impossible. This unlocks certain grenade spam angles that most players wouldn't think to use. When I was first writing down my thoughts on the Loch-n-Load, I was mainly focused on the projectile speed's impact on mid and long range encounters. Originally, I planned on pointing out that at close ranges, the Loch is actually worse than Iron Bomber in stock simply because it has less ammo. At close range, a target is still unable to reactively dodge a perfectly aimed grenade that is shot right at their center of mass, regardless of what grenade launcher shot it. However, I actually do think that at close ranges, Loch-n-Load grenades are easier to hit because it increases the range at which you can aim pipes without having to predict where the target is going to strafe. So while on the receiving end of the Loch-n-Load, you notice that it is harder to dodge long and mid-range shots, the close range feels the same as stock because you don't have time to react to either projectile. However, from the demo's perspective, aiming is easier at close range because there is less guesswork, since the item functions like hit scan for longer than the other grenade launchers. Alright, hopefully this rant makes sense. I wanted to make a video about this because it seems like the discussion about this weapon tends to imply that there are times when the alternatives are noticeably better, but in my personal opinion, it seems like the Loch-n-Load simply outclasses the other primaries. At the end of the day, I think this boils down to whether or not I am correct about how much easier directs are to hit with this weapon. If you disagree, let me know why in the comments. Thank you for watching.
Oh, well, don't do that, I guess.